Context scholars Bruce Molina and Richard Rarbaugh have shown us convincingly that it is indeed possible to sketch an, quote, originating structure, end quote, which is simply a list of the actions that the parable reports. That's the source I'm using for this. The parable of the talents, or the parable of the coins in Luke, has 4 such elements. First, as he is about to embark on a long journey, a master entrusts money to slaves, returns, and demands an accounting. So before Luke got a hold of the story and Matthew got a hold of the story, good chance this element was there. Not good chance, absolutely had to be there. Because remember, Luke never read Matthew, Matthew never read Luke. So those elements were in queue, and to a better degree, those elements were probably in Jesus the way he originally told the story before it was even recorded in Q. Before he goes on a long journey, the master entrusts money to servants, he returns and demands an accounting. Second element of its originating structure. Some of the servants or slaves have increased the entrusted amount and return that augmented sum to the master, who rewards them. The third originating structure element is that one servant or slave confesses that he was frightened and therefore buried the amount entrusted to him in the ground so that he might return it intact to his master. The fourth originating structural element is that the angry master takes the money of the last servant and gives it to the first, the one who has the most return. If we therefore pare down and boil down this parable to what might have been Jesus' original story, those 4 elements are what we find. Only those 4 elements. And in this way, we see that the parable loses reference to diligence among those waiting for the parousia. Yes or no? Isn't that where all the weight goes in how the story's understood? Okay, I'm telling you this, folks. If you boil down this story into a nice balsamic reduction, you get rid of the extra water that came in those in the different contexts as the story vibrated throughout the Mediterranean over decades. And you get down to the elements that must have been in Jesus' original telling of the story. The thing that we like to celebrate in the story the most is gone. What does that tell you? The thing we're taking from the story most was alien to Jesus' original context. That was not Jesus' point of the story. Could not be. Further true to its nature as a parable, if we boil down the story to its original elements, its 4 original elements, the story is a parable. It's no longer an allegory, as it is in Luke, where it gets explained, this means this and this means this. And it's given no application or interpretation. You understand, when Jesus told stories, he didn't tell allegories, he told parables. You either get a parable or you don't get a parable, but it's not explained. This is what the parable means. Dot, 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 dot. This means that, and that means this. Try to understand this. Allegories are allegories. Parables are parables. What the early Jesus groups did was turn the parables of Jesus into allegories. Or stories in some way that can be easily explained. Remember, we don't have context for this story as Jesus originally. Where was he when he originally told a story? Who did he originally tell the story to? What happened that made Jesus go, I got a story to tell you? We don't know, because the narratives have been constructed for theological purposes decades later. That's easy to prove, because when I look at Luke and I look at Matthew, which both follow the Markan storyline, he's telling the parables in different places in different occasions. They were getting close to Jerusalem. They thought the kingdom would manifest immediately, Luke said. Then he tells the story. Is that what the context you get in Matthew? Nope. So the context is different. What does that tell you? It tells you that Matthew invented the context. Q saying. In Q, there is no narrative to give context. There's just Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. It's the collection of stories. Matthew cherry picks and puts them into his narrative, which best serves his theology. Luke cherry picks and puts them into his narrative that best fits his theology. They're not writing for 21st century Western people who have biographical concerns. The emphasis that we give those rewards and punishments, which is foreign to the original story in its original form, is that the first two guys are considered by us to be the heroes. Do we agree? And the third guy is a loser, right? He got what he deserved, right? He got exactly what he deserved. That's what I'm telling you, that in the original structure of the story, that's not clear. That's not Jesus' argument. Yeah.
The one thing I think is missing in that story is process. Because we see results. Okay. We don't know the hustle that first guy went through to render those extra. We don't know the hustle.
Sure.
Or how much hustle. Or the second guy.
Or if the hustle was actually moral.
A moral hustle.
If the hustle was good. If it was honorable.
Maybe the third guy didn't want to compromise his morality. And that's what he did. And that's what's missing in this parable. We only see results. We don't see process. Also, if an elite reads the story or hears the story, will he interpret the story differently than if a peasant hears the story? Yeah. He'll look for his right. Oh my.
Was Jesus an elite or a peasant?
A peasant.
Uh-oh.
Well, says one thing, it means another.
Uh-oh. We got a problem here. So, here's the thing. The story, whatever it was in its original form, had those four elements, right? In that form, it challenged the first century listener to reflect on the possible applications in her or his own situation. So, to get the context, we must ask, who were the listeners? Definitely not these folks. In trying to understand how we live a moral life, a morally virtuous life, sometimes we're tempted to go back and ask WWJD, what would Jesus do? Then this story comes along, which sounds very nice to my capitalistic American ears. Sure. Work hard, hustle, and make results that are profitable. Oh, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the gifts that God has given me. Work hard and hustle, and the results will be shown. Your ministry will have 100 people. Why does it only have 10? And that's what Jesus wants. Hold on. Jesus wants that? Or a congenial Jesus? A Jesus that has been reshaped according to my own American image and likeness, an American Idol.